Hello, everyone, and welcome to SchoolTube University. My name is Paul Langhorst, and I'm the Program Director for SchoolTube University. SchoolTube University is a professional development arm of SchoolTube, where we share video production tips for K-12 instructors and their students. I'll share more on SchoolTube a bit later, but in essence, we're like a safe version of YouTube for schools, and we're happy that you've joined us for this program. This course is on interviewing tips and techniques for video production. Our instructor today is Don Goble, the award-winning media instructor at Ladue High School here in St. Louis. Don, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you, Paul. Good to be back, and I am excited to talk about interviewing tips for video. Interviewing is really one of my most favorite things to do, and it's also, I think, a misunderstood technique and skill, especially for media instructors who are producing journalistic or news packages, news stories. So I'm going to fill you with a bunch of ideas, techniques, and skills that I believe will help your students and have helped mine for over a decade. The first place we want to start is where all journalists starts, are implementing the 5 W's and the H, which ultimately just means who, what, when, where, why, which is bolded, and how. The why is certainly the most important, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. But we start with who, and sometimes when we do pitch meetings in class or for media, trying to figure out what topics to discuss, what's happening in your school or your community, and you're wondering who to interview. Of course, you want to interview people who are related to your story, and everyone has a story to tell. So there's an acronym that I learned years ago, and it's cool character or cool characters. And cool just stands for colorful, outgoing, opinionated, and lively, which ultimately means not shy, has some energy, won't be boring. We want to avoid the reluctant or the shy people. Not that we should not interview those, but maybe when getting started, really look for the person who is outgoing, unique, has a lot to say, is opinionated, and especially practice with them, but also then look to identify those individuals as they relate to your story. Can give you some anecdotes later. The what. So we must have a purpose. This is one of the areas, besides the why, that I really find the most difficult sometimes to get through to kids. So I'll give you an example. We're in prom season right now, and prom happens every year at every school and has for years. So to simply report and talk to the prom coordinator or the principal about prom or the student council president about prom and where prom is and what time it is and what everyone's going to be wearing and what the food is. I mean, that's all maybe important, but it's not unique. But what if we interviewed and talked to 3 outstanding, energetic young women who were afraid they couldn't attend prom because they couldn't afford the dress, and so they decided to make their own? That's a unique story. Those would be cool characters to go out and find. That would be a great purpose. You would tell the story of prom through the eyes of those 3 and why they chose to create or design a dress on their own. And one thing we really want to do is to avoid interviewing our friends or just other students in our class. We can do that for practice. That actually is something I'm going to talk about as a practice technique. But when we're producing stories that we want to use for our television shows, our morning news announcements, our magazine style shows, or whatever type of program that you might be doing, and or just for feature stories for a website or publication, we want to avoid friends or students in the class. The big one is, why will the audience care? We need to find a common theme to the story. We watched the story today about a father and a son. The son has a disability, but they lived in Montana and they built a golf course on their homeland. And they did it for a lot of reasons. They overcoming adversity. There had been some death in the family. There was a lot of challenges in their life. But the son decided to help build this golf course. He mows the golf course. He invites anybody in the community with disabilities to come use the golf course. He actually won a bronze medal in the Special Olympics. That's a unique story. That's certainly a cool character. But why do we want to care about that? Well, we discussed that the overall why is we can all relate to overcoming adversity. We can all relate to trying to or knowing maybe somebody that has challenges in their life and they've come out on top because they've taken control of their life. We can relate to a father-son or a parental relationship. There are common themes, and so we have to identify those. Why will the audience care? Because if you don't care, if you're just creating an assignment because Mr. Goble gave it to you, you are not going to be, it's not going to be a very interesting story. And then you just need to go through the rest of the tips. When will the interview take place? Set a production schedule. Where will the interview take place? Location is important, we'll discuss later. And then how is your story unique and or significant? That will tie back into why should the audience care and what your purpose is. We talk a little bit about a cool character. I'm going to show you a snippet of a very cool character of a gentleman who started his own business in Carrollton, Texas. I teach a video journalism camp at the Gloria Shields, NSPA Gloria Shields workshop. And a student put together a fantastic interview with this store owner. Let's just watch the beginning intro of the clip right here.
Pecan Creek store owner John Scott describes how he has accomplished his dream.
My wife and I started a business here about 7 years ago. I love being with people. My favorite thing is to see someone smile.
By that quick snippet and that soundbite, just a piece of the interview that you heard, you can tell this is a man who cares more about just running a store. He cares about people, and he cares about his customers, and he has big ideas. And so that's definitely a cool character. Before we really need to get going into anything, and we've talked about this a lot in our videos, Paul, we need to plan. Planning should be about 75% of your process because really the best projects happen in the planning stages. So we need to brainstorm ideas. I love doing that as a class. Do it on a Google Doc or on a piece of paper individually. Find those themes that everyone can relate to. Write down and identify the purpose, be able to communicate the purpose prior to the interview, and then ask friends, colleagues, parents, research on the internet or social media as much as you can about the topic or the subject that you're covering. And then here's a big one that I'd like to talk about. We want to create tell me conversation starters. We don't want to treat the interview as a question and answer. And many times, that's what we interpret with an interview. If we go for a job interview, we have one individual on the side of the desk asking a question or a team of people asking the person a question, the applicant a question, and the applicant's giving answers. And it feels like more of an interrogation than a conversation. It isn't as open-ended. I've made the analogy of when a teacher asks a student in class about the topic they're studying or the book that they read. Of course, the teacher is looking for the correct answer. And the student might get nervous, especially if they're not sure of the answer. They're very unsure. So when you have a conversation with an individual, you ultimately have a wonderful interview because they tell you stories. Simply by saying, tell me. Paul, can I try this with you real quick?
Sure.
See, I just asked you a question. Can I try this with you real quick? I got a one-word answer. Sure. Now, what if I said, Paul, tell me about SchoolTube University.
Well, I could talk for hours.
Well, tell me like one main thing. Tell me one main purpose about SchoolTube University.
Well, there's a lot of media instructors out there that are working in K-12 that are not deeply trained in media, and they're looking for resources, looking all over for it. And what we wanted to do was try to, deliver content from a fellow media instructor as opposed to just, somebody off the street. So Don is obviously somebody that works in K-12, has been doing this for years. So we thought it would be awesome to be able to deliver all these tips and techniques from the viewpoint of an active media instructor and deliver it through SchoolTube University, and also share a little bit about what we do at SchoolTube along the way.
See, Paul's a great interview. He's a cool character, right? I asked him a question. Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
Sure. And then I said, tell me about SchoolTube University, a topic he knows obviously a lot about, deeply, and he told me about it. Now, we could go even further. From that, we could get into, well, tell me more about what the offerings are. Tell me more about who you're hoping to reach. Tell me about some of the feedback. Tell me what your future plans are. Like, we could continue to go on with this tell me. I could go on for an hour, especially because he set it up by saying, I could go on forever talking about it. To me, as the interviewer, I'm going, great. So we'll get into some of the follow-up questions later. Like, he offered a lot of different information. Well, tell me why you felt it was important to help media instructors. Tell me how media instructors have given you feedback, how it has been helpful. So just simply by listening to Paul's answer, I already came up with some follow-up questions. And I'll talk later how sometimes the follow-up question is even more important than the original question. So during that time of the conversation, be prepared to take notes, listening for what we call sound bites, short, interesting, exciting, and powerful quotes. Paul gave me a great soundbite right there. I might even break that soundbite up in a couple different parts, as I might drop in some different natural sound or B-roll shots to tell my story. But we don't want to capture. I might interview Paul for 10 minutes. Our audience doesn't want to hear all 10 minutes of that. They want to hear the best 30 seconds, the best 60 seconds, the best 90 seconds maybe overall of what Paul's story is. So we want to search for those sound bites. So during the interview, as the reporter, the interviewer, take some notes. I wouldn't do it on a phone. You could, unless you set that up possibly with your, hey, do you mind if I take notes on a phone or on an iPad? You might just say, I'm going to take some notes on a notepad. The other thing is if you're working with a partner and they are the camera operator and you are the reporter, the camera operator, while they're paying attention to the camera and the sound, could be taking notes, looking for the best sound bites that the individual said. That way it allows the reporter, the journalist, to just have that conversation and continue going back and forth, not worrying about capturing everything. But while we're listening for that B-roll or those sound bites, I want to listen for B-roll. What did Paul just tell me? What will my interview tell me that will be interesting for B-roll? The cool character from the store that we saw there in Carrollton immediately talked about not only his products, but the customers and the individuals he hopes comes in, that he interacts with in the town. Those are the interactions in the B-roll I would want to see. For SchoolTube University, from what Paul said, I would want to see what the content looks like on SchoolTube University on their website. I would want to see media teachers using the techniques that they have learned through the content being delivered. So I would want to listen for ideas that I could potentially incorporate into a longer format story based upon what my interview told me. Before we get into more depths of that, we've got to cover equipment, and I'm only going to cover it briefly because the best camera you have is the one you have. It's not about the equipment. It's not about having, the best camera, the best microphone, the best this or that. It's about a story. It's not about equipment. In fact, many of our kids' devices are better than some of the broadcast cameras that I have sitting in my closet right now because they shoot in 4K, and my other cameras are 6 years old. So they work, but they're a bit antiquated. So use the best camera that you have. It doesn't matter. For an interview, I will say a microphone is imperative, if at all possible. And really, even if you're going to use your phone, there are cheap microphone options for $40, $50, $60. As far as cameras, obviously as media instructors, we are beyond using mobile devices. We're using DSLRs, camcorders, studio cameras. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. I will say, if you're using a DSLR camera, which many of our print journalist teachers are doing, who are also trying to do some broadcasts, but they're covering newspaper or yearbook, DSLRs shoot beautiful composition, and it can be very, very difficult to capture audio. So be prepared to find options to help really monitor and capture audio. A tripod helps with a steady shot. I would highly recommend a tripod. There are products out there, iographer, cases that'll fit for phones and iPads that you can then put on a regular tripod. The world can be your tripod. Find a flat surface and stick that camera down. Stack some books. Get a crate. Get whatever you can. It really helps with composition. And remember, a steady shot is a professional shot. A shaky shot is an amateur shot. However, if you are going to do a mobile handheld or any kind of handheld techniques, here's a quick tip for handheld and mobile. You can see on the image there, pinch with your fingers in all four corners of the device. And then make sure if you're sitting to interview that the person you're interviewing is sitting as well. Your elbows can be resting on the side of your chest and your knees are slightly bent if you're standing. If you're sitting, it's no problem. If you're standing, because there is no place to sit or it makes more sense to stand, have a slight bend in your knees. Your students will tell you that looks awkward and feels awkward, and you tell them they're doing it right because that slight bend in the knee will help avoid the shakiness. If we have our knees upright and our knees locked, the legs will get tired, the shot will get shaky. So I mentioned audio and the importance of audio. We have a link out here, Paul, and we can probably add this resource to SchoolTube University as well. where my mantra is audio is as important, if not more important, than the video itself. I wrote a blog post about it that we will share out with you, and give you some examples. But in brief, I will tell you, if a shot is a bit shaky, maybe the lighting's a little bit off, or it's not composed perfectly correct, but it has amazing audio, I'm going to watch and I'm going to listen. If it's beautifully composed, the lighting is perfect, the composition is right on point, but I can't hear what the person is saying, or it's echoey because I didn't use a microphone and I stood too far away, I'm not going to pay attention. I'm not going to watch. I would recommend lavalier microphones that can clip. You can notice there, you can clip to a tie, clip to a shirt. A handheld microphone, if you use a handheld microphone, the reporter should hold the microphone, or another person on the production staff should hold the microphone. Do not give the microphone to the person you're interviewing. Why? They may talk with their hands, and now the audio is going all over the place. They are in control of the microphone. You want to be in control of the audio. You hold the microphone. Or as you see there in the middle image, you could use a shotgun mic. Like he's actually holding that shotgun mic, but actually if you wanted to, it could fit on top of the broadcast camera and slide on top. And there are actually now mobile device rigs, or what they're called. And the rig of the mobile device gives you a case, gives you a shotgun mic, gives you a tiny little light so you can light your subject, and it works perfectly. So there's a lot of solutions that are out there. I always tell my students, you don't know if you have audio unless you have headphones. So you have to have headphones. The one caveat being, if you're using a mobile device, you can do one of two things. You can get a splitter where you can plug in the device for the microphone and then a headphone so that you can hear what you're recording. Or before you get into the long interview, record a test. Sit there, record just, hey, would you say your name and spell it for me? What'd you have for breakfast today? Record that, play it back, and take a look at how it sounds. But if you're using a broadcast camera, which I would recommend for many broadcast interviews, make sure it has a microphone jack and then a headphone jack so you can monitor the audio and make sure you're not just capturing noise or you're not capturing the microphone on the camera, because every camera has an internal microphone. And that is what will sound echoey for any interview unless you have a microphone. And now if you don't have a microphone, and in fact, we have resources we're going to share as well. I wrote an entire book and I wrote an entire iTunes U course about using a mobile device with no accessories, no tripod, no microphone, no lights, no anything. And one of the main things I talk about is getting close. And you can see that in the bottom image right there. Close being about 2 to 3 feet away. Any further than 2 to 3 feet away, it's going to be echoey. Any closer, the audio is going to be great, but you start struggling. Maybe you got too much of the face in the video, which I'm okay with that. We'll talk a little bit later in composition. But if you're going to use no microphone, use a quiet location. Location's really important, we'll talk about, but if you can't have a microphone, you must find a neutral location that is quiet, that is not echoey. Hallways, echoey. Rooms that don't have carpet, echoey. Find rooms that have carpet, that have curtains, that are just ultimately quiet, more quiet than others for no microphone, and that could work for you. And that works for any camera to get 2 to 3 feet away. For composition, we follow the rule of thirds. Much like in photography, we use the grid if we're on our phones or devices. We divide the screen up in 9 parts, trying to place our character, we call them, the person we're interviewing them, on either the left vertical hash or the right vertical hash. The eyes, you notice, are on the upper horizontal third. We call that eyes on third. So again, if you're wondering, how do I compose this shot? Where do they look? Where do the eyes go? How are they positioned? Notice that individual is facing the reporter. They're not looking at the camera. They're facing the reporter because they're having a conversation. They're not talking directly to the audience. The eyes are on that upper third. She's located in that vertical third on the left. Notice her head is in the upper left hash. Her shoulders are at the level of the lower right hash, and the open space then is on the right vertical rule of third. That's called talking space, which you notice there as well. Talking space allows for the open space in front of the camera to go towards to indicate that they are talking to a reporter. If you were to move that character to the other side of the screen, they'd be smashed against the screen. We'd be showing the field behind her head. It's visually not appealing. The way to capture this is to do an over-the-shoulder shot. You notice that in the image below. The camera is actually a little bit in front of the reporter's shoulder. It's over her right shoulder, and the interview is in the right third. So the camera's over the right shoulder. You compose them in the right third of the viewfinder of the camera. For the top shot, the camera was over the left shoulder, and they're positioned in the left third. Right, right, left, left. We can talk more about that later. Also notice the eye level. If you are going to stand, your interview must stand. If you're going to sit, the interview must sit. What that does is create a neutral eye level for journalistic pieces. It looks nice, it looks flat, it looks on an even plane. If the journalist was sitting down and the person they're interviewing is standing, the interviewer is now looking down through the viewfinder and down at the audience, and it's visually unappealing. If the interviewee is sitting and the reporter is standing, now the interviewee is looking up off camera and it looks off-putting. And so we want to keep that eye level neutral. So there's your rule. Sit, sit, stand, stand. If you're using a mobile device, turn the grid on. Go into camera and find where the grid is to turn on. And our main rule about light, we don't have time to talk about light today. That could be a whole other webinar. It would be lighting. Your main rule about light, the light goes behind the camera, not the person you're interviewing. If the light goes behind the camera, notice in the bottom image and even in the top image, the sunlight in the top, the light in the studio is being cast on their face. So we can clearly see the person's face that we're interviewing. If the light were behind the individual, it would cast a silhouette that would make them look dark. And if we're doing a journalistic piece, not only is it visually unappealing to see somebody in the dark, but it also subconsciously tells us they have something to hide, and we don't want to do that. Location for the interview is very important. If at all possible, we want to place the subject in their environment. So in the top right, for our science teacher, Monica Bowman, she's in her lab. We see her lab table behind her, the sink. She's got medical posters and anatomy in the background. It makes sense to the story. The location now becomes a part of the story. If you read a book, when you watch a film, location sometimes can be a part of the character, right? So we want to place them in that location. In the middle one, we could be talking to Nick there, who works in the auto garage, and he talks about how he works on cars and works in the shop and does all these different types of hands-on projects. So where do we interview Nick? In the shop. The bottom one there, Philip, was actually covering the Michael Brown case back in 2014 here in St. Louis, and he actually went to the funeral of Michael Brown and interviewed the motorcade that led Michael Brown's casket to the cemetery. So Philip interviewed the leader of that motorcycle gang right outside the church where the funeral was held. He went right to the location at the event, so that's a great place to go to do it. Notice the camera locations as well in those pictures. The bottom image there you see is Lauren. Lauren, we didn't have a microphone for, so we found a quiet location, a neutral background that was dark, that was unassuming. The light is cast on her face, and now we can only focus on just what she is saying. Notice we see both of her eyes. In all of these images, we see both of the eyes. That kind of goes back to the composition. So make the subject, the location relative to the subject, and if you can't do that, make it as quiet as possible. And even if you can do it, try to make it as quiet as possible. But in Philip's case at the Michael Brown funeral, he had a microphone for that individual. So even though there was noise going on in the background, the microphone was the directional sound that we heard and captured, and the background noise did not interfere with the audio, which again is the most important. So once we use some of these techniques, we have to practice. It's like anything else. It's like an athlete. It's like if you're in the musical or a theater, whatever you do, as a performance, you need to practice. Treat the interview as a performance. So we need to practice. So how do you practice? Here's one thing we do in my class. We choose a class partner. We set up the equipment. We compose our shot. We place the mic on our partner, and we take turns interviewing each other, which means either we can change the location of the camera from one side to the other, or we can just get up and move chairs. Like these two individuals decided to just go to different parts of our learning area. This is a great place because when we as media teachers allow our students to go film either outside of our classroom or on location, we can't be there with them to see what they're doing. So to practice the interview and the composition and the sound and the questioning, in our location allows us a chance as the instructor to review what they're doing. Have your students truly listen and ask follow-up questions. Don't just create a list of questions and go down it one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. You will miss potentially an opportunity of what the individual said. And then listen for great sound bites. Watch the short video back. 2 minutes. Do this for 3 minutes. This does not have to be a long interview. Do 1 minute. I'm going to give you an example here in a second. But this is a great way to really have your students practice. Do it 2 or 3 times before you go out. You wouldn't just practice once and then go on stage and perform. You would practice as many times as you could prior to the major performance. Here is an example lesson for you. So you're with your partner in class. Have them say their name and spell it. And you should be recording while this is happening. We will do this on our regular interview because we now want to capture our character's name. We want to capture the exact spelling of their name. And if they have a title, we want to capture their title. I will promise you that if you do an interview and you decide to do an animated graphic for a lower third and you misspell your character's name, they will remember nothing about the interview other than you misspelled their name. And if you misspelled a title, people who watch their video will only tell you about the misspelling you had. Many of you listening to this who are media teachers and this has happened are shaking your heads. You're going, yeah, that's exactly what happened. So a way to prevent that, record, say your name and spell it. Have the student tell me about yourself. So I would just say, Julia, tell me about yourself. Who knows where that may go? You might get some really interesting explanations. We're going to show a practice one here in a minute. Tell me your greatest achievement in life and explain why. Well, now why would I ask that question? That's a big question. People like to talk about themselves and they like to share what's good in their life. Hopefully they'll tell you a story. Hopefully they'll tell you something really cool that happened to them. That helps the student practice their listening skills so that if they do get hear something really cool, they can follow up with questions that they didn't maybe prepare, but through listening, they now want to follow up. Tell me about your greatest challenge in life and explain why. My favorite storyteller of all time is Steve Hartman. And a few years ago, my class and I had a chance to interview Steve Hartman. Steve has worked for CBS News for 35 years, telling amazing human feature stories, human interest stories. And in our interview with him, he told us the answer that elicits some of the best storytelling and some of the best answers are when he asks them about adversity they've overcome or the challenges they've had in their life. Ultimately, that's where you can get really deep with people. Now, your students may be nervous, but your students may also open up. You may learn some things about your kids, but it's a skill that you may want to ask your interview because it gets beyond the when is the prom, where are we having it, what time does it start, and why are you involved in prom? What are you hoping prom will be? What are you hoping the prom experience will be for every individual? Tell me about that. Tell me the greatest challenges you had setting up prom. You will get a litany of problems that occurred. The greatest question we will ask. So notice it's tell me, tell me, tell me. 3 tell me's. The magic of 3s in storytelling. I do want to ask a question at the end. Is there anything else you would like to add? Sometimes that's an amazing question that just elicits an open response for the person you're interviewing to tell you whatever it is that they may want, that they may like. It kind of removes the pressure of them feeling like they had to answer something specific to what you were asking them and allows them to give you an opinion that maybe you didn't think of to ask. So it's a great one to end with. Here's an example, just the beginning of practicing for an interview. Okay, can you tell me your name and spell it?
My name is Esset Workina, ESSETEWORKINEH.
Okay, awesome. What's happening right now? Tell me what's crazy happening right now.
I have an AP World test today, and I'm really nervous because I haven't studied, but hopefully I do well.
Very simple, right? We found a quiet location. We used a mobile device. We did not use a microphone, but notice how close that we got. And it was just a simple say your name and spell it. And then Esset decided to start talking. Another big tip, even though I plan to interview Esset and Esset is ready to go, have a backup plan. Contact 3 or more people you want to interview. First of all, if you're doing a news package, you need at least a variety of opinions. So for a balanced story, you're going to need at least 2 interviews. You'll need a main character and a supporting character or supporting characters. And you'll want to pull sound bites from multiple people for a variety of those opinions. So contact at least 3 or more, contact 5, 6, so that when somebody backs out, somebody doesn't show up, they are totally shy or they freeze up on camera and they don't give you very good answers. You don't have to include all of them in your final story. It's called the cutting room floor. Filmmakers do it all the time. Many times my students feel an obligation to include everybody that they interview and an obligation to evenly include everybody that they interview. Ultimately, when you interview people, you will have one main character to step to the forefront who will ultimately be your cool character and tell you the best parts of the story. But certainly if you're covering a major issue with 2 sides, you better have 2 cool characters that are evenly talking about both sides. But you don't need to evenly have supporting characters for everything remaining throughout the way. Short little snippets of sound bites, or you may just say, you know what, it doesn't make sense to the story with the answers they gave me. I'm not going to use it. So have a backup plan, because I'll have kids come to me, Mr. Goble, Nikon, he didn't show up. I had it planned. I know you needed the interview footage by today, so what do I do? What do they expect me to tell them as the instructor? I told you have a backup plan. So there should be no excuse. Contact 3 or more. We need to get into conducting the interview, Paul. We've done a ton of planning.
Right.
So we really need to get into it now. So what do we need to do to conduct the interview? Well, we're not quite done yet with our planning. We need to check our equipment to make sure it all works. We want to make sure that we take physical notes on a notepad or clear it with your interview individual that it's okay to use your phone or a device. Hit record and then say your name and spell it. We've got to have that captured. That does 2 things. One, that we can use that as an audio check, as an audio level. And then, of course, we get the correct spelling of their name and their title. Make small talk for the mic check as well, right at the beginning. Obviously, in the situation here, look, you've got 2 individuals with a camera right in front of this rock store owner, and he's just, it can be intimidating. People can, and people want to look good on camera. And one thing I found is making small talk calms anxiety. Create the conversation. Tell me how's your morning going? What's new in your life? Tell me about whatever. This allows you as the reporter to make the connection with the interviewee and your camera operator to check sound so that if you need to raise or lower it. I always like to establish the purpose of the interview. I don't give my interviewee the questions ahead of time. That's another big mistake, I would say. Never give the questions ahead of time. And why would I not give the questions ahead of time? Well, the person will rehearse their answers. It won't sound natural. It won't sound authentic or genuine. What I can do, though, is establish my purpose. Paul, today, I'm going to talk to you about SchoolTube University. Don't feel like you have to tell me the exact perfect answers. I will edit this. But I really just want to learn more about what you do and why SchoolTube University exists and how it can be a useful tool for teachers in education. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Yeah, see, that sounds great. Okay, I just established my purpose. I also don't want to be in a rush. If I rushed through here with Paul and said, Paul, I got 5 minutes. You ready to go? All right, record. Here we go. Let's go.
Sometimes he does do that, though.
Well, so if you're in a rush as the reporter, your interview will be in a rush. If they're in a rush, they won't give good answers. And it ultimately will not turn out to be a positive experience. Have a seat. Sit back. Take it easy. Your pace of the way you talk can slow down the pace and the rush of the process. They'll be nervous, and when we get nervous, we rush, which is why it's important to practice. Remember, it's not an interrogation. Don't go down a checklist of questions. You might only end up interviewing for 5 minutes, but I've had students come back and say, Mr. Goble, you said to plan for 5 minutes. I ended up talking to them for 30. Fantastic. You got more than you'll ever need. And it's probably because you didn't go down a checklist. You really listened and followed up. Don't interrupt. When you're listening, that's for not interrupting. For editing purposes, you don't want to interrupt with like verbal affirmation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Me too. If you jump in with those kinds of verbal affirmations, you don't leave yourself an edit point to cut. And now you're interrupting what could have been a great soundbite for your interview when you get into editing. And then take notes on the sound bites that you want to use, which we mentioned earlier. And then follow-up questions. Follow-up questions are better than originally planned ones. It shows that you listened. It shows that you're curious. It shows that you're interested. And ultimately, you get to the depth. It's like peeling that onion, right? You want to get to the core of that onion. And the only way to do that is to keep peeling back layers. And those are the follow-up questions. We also want to focus on the speaker with our eyes. That again shows that we're interested and we're listening. If we're only looking down at our notepad, which we'll need to do once in a while, right? To take a note or two. But if we're only looking down, it shows we're disinterested or bored. Make contact with your eyes. Remember the open-ended discussion questions. Tell me more about that. Tell me how it made you feel. Get into some of those emotional responses. How did it feel when all of your hard work for prom came to fruition and the kids had fun? Tell me how that made you feel. The feeling soundbite is the heart of the story. That's what the emotional piece. We don't want to just tell me what time it starts. Tell me what time it ends. Tell me, is there an after party? Again, those are facts that may be useful, but that's certainly not as interesting as the feeling question of how did it feel when you had people coming up to you, giving you hugs, thanking you for a wonderful experience. Another great follow-up question is why. So they say, so Paul says, yeah, we want SchoolTube University to be a great tool for educators in K-12. And he might stop. And I would say, why? Why is that important to you? Why is that important to teachers? Why is that an important part of the goal? Why? Be that 5-year-old who constantly asks, why? Why this? Why that? Listen for B-roll opportunities. We use the term show and tell. So if my interview tells me about something, I have to go back then and show that later. If I'm doing a news story, I want to show what they're telling me. Show and tell. Rephrasing can help. It helps the interviewee think through the question sometimes. Again, that also allows them some release some of that anxiety if they want to stop and start. If you rephrase the question and it's incorrect, it allows them to do it again. Same thing with paraphrasing, asking questions that really let the person know you're listening. I love to offer wait time. It's that as a teacher, we know what that is. We ask the question or we offer some input and we give them time to think. That also lends into don't be in a rush. Give them a moment. Let it sit a beat or two. Have that awkward pause. Over on the right, you see me holding my finger over my mouth. That's my technique to shut up. Do not interrupt. Give them wait time. Really listen, because I've found that when I listen, I ultimately get much better information. I also don't ever want to judge a person's answers. Certainly not verbally. Like, oh, I don't agree. I don't agree with you. Well, that's the end of the interview, right? I mean, if you off-put somebody like that, it should be over. But you also don't want to frown. You don't want to scrunch your eyes. You don't want to shake your head no when they're talking about something that's yes. As the journalist, you need to be completely neutral, and nonverbals can sometimes speak louder than verbals. So be very conscious of your nonverbals. And then, of course, remember to make sure anything else you would like to add. Paul, we're getting into our final tips. Here's a top 10 list of final tips. Purpose. Start with your purpose. When your students come to you with ideas for projects, tell me what's the purpose. If they can't tell you the purpose of it, have them keep digging. Why do we care? Why will the audience care? We want to be curious when we're interviewing. That helps with follow-up questions. It helps with showing interest. It helps with making a connection point with the person we're interviewing. It shows that we care. Be curious. Be a risk taker. That goes back to not just interviewing your friends and the kids in class. Go talk to the person who sits alone in the lunchroom. Find out what their story is. Talk to the people who are never talked to. Talk to the student who's singing by themselves or whatever. Be a risk taker. Go talk to people that you don't know. Every person you talk to has a story. And if the courage to potentially dig in and maybe want to do a story about them, ask them. Be a risk taker. Be human. Be honest. Empathize with them. Tell them the purpose of it. If they're telling you a really sad, difficult, personal story, you don't have to have a neutral face then. You can empathize a little bit with them. When they are done with the soundbite, go ahead and jump in like, wow, that must have really been tough for you. Can you tell me more about that? So, being empathetic can really lead to that connection point, can lead to great sound bites. Listen for those sound bites, document them. That's better than recording a 10-minute interview, coming into the editing lab, importing the footage into my computer and being like, I don't know I got to watch it again. I don't know what the story's going to be. Well, that's inefficient and it's wasting time. Practice, 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 practice some more. The days your students are like, oh, Mr. Goble, it's Monday and my interview's on Saturday. I don't have anything to do. Wrong. Practice. Location scout. Practice the lighting. Practice the use of the microphone. Practice if the microphone drops out and you need to do it without a microphone. Practice your composition. Practice your tell me abouts. Practice your editing of sound bites. Practice listening for sound bites. Every single tip or a part of the conducting the interview I gave today could be mini lessons that any student could do any single day when they tell you, I have nothing to do. There's always something to do, and that's practice. And the bottom line is, have fun. Interviewing people is fun. Getting to know people and their stories are fun. But remember, people are putting their stories in your hands. So you want to establish a level of trust and assert your own intentions to represent them fairly and accurately. People want to look good on camera. They don't want to gotcha interviews. They want to come across fairly and accurately. And as the journalist, that's our job to do that. And when we do all of those things, I think we can produce a really successful product. Before I turn it back over, here are a couple of examples of the final tips. So here's something not to do. Pay attention to the location of the interview, the composition of the style of the interview, the color of it, and the sound.
So tell me about technology in the classroom.
We use a lot of different technology in the classroom. We use computers, iPads, tablets.
Here's an example of what to do. You saw Lauren earlier, found a quiet location, actually went in a little unprepared for this interview, modeling for the class how to do this. So I didn't prepare anything. I took a volunteer from the class and I was like, wow, I better listen, because if I don't listen, I'm not going to have a follow-up question. So watch what happened with just a snippet of the conversation with Lauren. It's all good now?
Yep.
Okay, so we're recording?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Lauren, thank you so much
No problem.
for coming back for day 2 to be interviewed. Okay, so I just want you to know that we're just going to ask you to kind of have a conversation. Don't feel like you have to give the perfect answer.
Okay.
If you want to stop and start again, that's totally fine. We're going to edit basically the best things that you say.
Okay.
It would help if you rephrase maybe a part of my question in your answer.
Okay.
Especially if I say somebody's name or something like that. That would be just helpful. Do you have any questions at all before we get started?
No.
Okay, cool. So we're just going to kind of do a microphone check, another microphone check now that we're recording.
Okay.
Will you just say your name and spell it for me?
Okay. Lauren, Lauren.
And your last name?
Oh, Pesce.
Okay, and what year in school are you?
I'm a sophomore.
You're a sophomore. Okay. So, Lauren, tell me about yourself. Tell me Lauren's story.
I'm 15 years old and I go to Ladue High School and my birthday's in a month.
How old are you
And
going to be?
I'm gonna be 16. And yeah.
Anything special for the 16th birthday? Any sweet 16?
No, but like I can drive, so like that's exciting.
Tell me about driving. How has that been? Have you gone to the class? Did you go to Harder's coaching school?
Yeah, I
You
just
did?
went to that, yeah.
All right, tell me about the coaching school. Tell me how that's been.
It's really good. Like I used to be like a really bad driver. Like the first time I went on the highway, I almost got in 2 wrecks. But like they weren't my fault, but like still. And then like after it, like it was like a lot better.
What are our takeaways? The first video, you saw the reporter on camera. The story's not about the reporter. The story's about the individual. Make sure that we focus on them. The mic is too far away. We can't hear them. It's a loud location. You heard a door slam in the background. You can barely hear the answer of Martina on the right. The location's not relative. The question was, tell me about technology in the classroom, and they're interviewing in the hallway by a locker and a fire alarm. It just doesn't make any sense. The composition is poor. The color is yellow. They did put them in a left and right third, technically, but they're cutting off their legs. It looks really bizarre. They're too far away. We can't gather any sound bites from it. Now, the bottom one, notice that I checked in with the camera operator. So I had a student run the camera while I was the interviewer and modeling for the class. Make sure it was recording. Make sure it looks good. Notice how I coached my subject. Paul, do you notice when I asked you a question, I coached you a little bit? I said, don't feel like you have to give the perfect answer. See, I did it there as well. Coaching your subject puts them at ease, but also states your intentions and really kind of help. People aren't used to being interviewed. Coach them a little bit with these techniques now that you've learned. Say your name and spell it. We got that. Was recorded. Notice how nervous Lauren was at the beginning. Expect that. Expect every person you interview to be a little bit nervous. If they're not nervous, you've hit a home run. You found an excellent, cool character. But I always expect everyone I interview to be a little nervous. But then, notice how she started to open up? And that's where the connection happened. And that's when Lauren told a story. And that's when we found some great soundbite opportunities. Here's a final news story example. We talked a little bit about B-roll and finding sound bites, and some people might be like, well, I don't know how that looks, Don. I mean, what does that really look like? So we went a couple years ago at the Kempa Camp at Marquette University. We went to visit the Milwaukee Zoo. Again, I was modeling for some mobile journalists how to use your device to interview. And I did not plan this interview ahead of time, but when you hear the interview, you hear the first clip of it, you'll know why. We found this gentleman is a cool character and decided to tell his story.
There's a white armband on the right flipper. It's on the right side, it's a boy. It's on the left side, it's a girl. This is fun. This is fun. To me, it's fun working with people, talking with people. What we did today is we took a walk through the lower zoo where the Asian animals are located. And what we did is we explained what was going on. What's the difference in the exhibits between predators and prey? The same thing, we talked a little bit about what type of fur and how does it vary from animal to animal. Okay, we got a chance to see some exotic animals such as a small red panda. Some of the more common animals, although they're near extinction, such as the elephant and giraffe. Learning from the people, okay? As people tell me about something, a little piece of information gets stuck back here somewhere along the line. Most of the stuff that we talked about today is stuff that I either read, but more importantly, I either got from zookeepers, fellow volunteers, or from the public. That's what's fun. That's why I love it. Again, Trivia Pursuit. I like to do this for you guys.
Final steps. Publishing the interview. Here's our segue. We upload it to SchoolTube. All of my kids upload their videos to SchoolTube. By doing so now, we can share the SchoolTube URL to the person that you interviewed, to the group that you interviewed. You can share it out to your school, to your community, to your parent e-newsletters. You can share it wherever you need to, wherever you like. Social media, get it out there. Share that work. Don't let the video sit in Google Drive. Don't let it sit on your computer. Don't let it sit on YouTube where it's blocked in 90 or 80% of schools. Don't let it sit there. Share the SchoolTube URL. My students also then embed the video on their student digital portfolio. So SchoolTube is a great host to use that embed feature so that a student can embed their video, they can write a short story about it next to it or a blog reflection and tell me about the experience. They can tell me some backstories about filming or challenges that they had. They can tell me about clips that they decided to cut. They can tell me about anything else that might, anecdotes that might be interesting that I might not have known about since I wasn't a part of this particular interview when these students went out and interviewed Lauren. And so now I've got it on SchoolTube, they've got it on their website, their portfolio, they've blogged about it, and this is the process. We'll just go and do this again now, next month. Sometimes our interviews can take, projects can take 2 weeks, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 8 or 9 if they're doing a documentary. But to focus on this one type of interview and using these skills, I think you can have a successful end product.
Right. The other nice thing about uploading your video to SchoolTube is that we're a closed system. We're not like YouTube, which is the wild, wild west and open to the world. So your students' videos are going to be hosted on our site, and the suggested videos that come up alongside them are going to be videos from other students that are about similar topics or however the search engine on our system works. It's going to suggest other relevant topics based on the way the particular video was tagged. But you can rest assured it's not going to lead you down a path to inappropriate content. And that's the most important thing about SchoolTube.
Well, and they also might find some interview videos that they can use as models or examples, or news packages now that you can use as a model or example in class, which we like to do as well. I don't like to show too many examples to students because then they'll mimic potentially the same type of story, but to show some models and examples and to have those related subjects in that area in SchoolTube is super helpful. I do want to offer some free resources on my website, dongoble.com/published. The iTunes U course I talked about is all about using a mobile device with no accessory. It takes you from start to finish, from the history of a citizen journalist all the way up to a capstone project of doing a 2 to 3 minute news story. Interviewing an expert. A lot of my information today was based on this 20-something page book that I wrote a couple years ago about anybody is an expert. And there are multiple ways to interview them. And so a lot of the information I gave you today is also in that book. And then on my website, dongoble.com, where all of my information and resources are free, as well as connections and link outs to all of the webinars that we have now recorded for SchoolTube.
Great. Thanks, Don. That was great information. One thing I'd like to just echo is that the technique of asking that last question, is there anything else you'd like to add, is very powerful. I've been fortunate to be interviewed on television here in St. Louis in a past career multiple times, and that technique is actually used by the reporters. And it's actually very powerful because a lot of times you're keyed up and you're trying to think about what to say, and when they ask that question, you're immediately put at ease, and a lot of times you'll go to some of your best content as the interviewee. And I noticed that a lot of the videos that were the actual news story once it was published, the soundbite that they chose was from that question. So, and then I actually started anticipating it, and then I would make sure that I had something that I wanted to deliver in that soundbite. So it can kind of swing both ways, but it's very good. So what I want to do now, just to wrap up, I'd like to connect the dots to what Don shared and what we do at SchoolTube. We talked about it just a little bit right there. Obviously, once a video is completed, it needs to be hosted and shared in some way, and that's basically what we do for K-12 schools. We provide a free, safe video hosting and sharing platform dedicated for K-12 schools. As a way to better explain what we do, let's just watch this very brief video, and then I'll have some closing comments.
SchoolTube is now viewed in nearly all U.S. schools, and SchoolTube's teacher-driven video approval process protects student viewing, making SchoolTube the place to safely watch and share videos created by school communities. Educators and students are creating, watching, and sharing their videos to support homework assignments, producing videos of their sports teams, clubs, and musical events, and telling the amazing stories happening around them through the power of video, all the while making teachers, friends, and families proud of their learning journeys. Join the video revolution and power your learning journeys on SchoolTube today.
So as you can see, SchoolTube can become your video hosting hub for receiving submissions from students and sharing them with your school or the world. As a moderator, Don's a moderator on SchoolTube. He reviews the work that his students produce, and once they're reviewed by him, they're automatically hosted and posted across the SchoolTube system. But Don, as a moderator, can also produce videos and approve his own content. So it's a two-way street. But the most important aspect of SchoolTube is that teachers act as moderators to review and approve student submissions. And because of this, SchoolTube is approved for use on school networks. We're not blocked like YouTube. Lastly, SchoolTube is a free service supported by school-safe ads and sponsors. And for more information, please just visit schooltube.com, and we'll have everything that you need there. And with that, we're done. Don, thank you again for all your wonderful interviewing tips, and we look forward to working with you on the next program.
Thanks, Paul. Great to see you again.
And if you have questions, our emails are up, so please just shoot us a question. Thank you.